In our initial exploration, we traced a path through ancient clay inscriptions and concealed writings. We witnessed remnants of Sumer, catastrophic waters, paradises, divine assemblies, transformed into biblical narrative. Yet that marked merely the opening chapter. This evening, our second part unlocks fresh passages. Consider this. What if the Vatican's apprehension stemmed not solely from archaic manuscripts, but equally from emblems etched into sacred buildings, tales of monarchs, and murmurs of prohibited understanding? What if remembrance endured, not obliterated, but concealed within our very view? Should the initial narrative spark your curiosity about what the Vatican continues to keep hidden, remain here with me. And should you find value in these concealed reverberations of history, I welcome your support through liking this video. Your engagement allows us to press forward on this silent expedition deeper into mysteries unexplored. Thus, our second part commences, moving beyond clay inscriptions and holy texts, into lineages, soaring structures, and prohibited mechanisms. Understanding why the Vatican genuinely feared the Anunnaki requires beginning with those rulers who proclaimed their authority originated from the gods themselves. Throughout the ages, leaders have asserted their governing rights stemmed not merely from politics but from divine appointment. Within ancient Mesopotamia, monarchs were frequently portrayed as selected by celestial powers, their blood carrying strength that common mortals did not possess. Certain ancient records even indicate these kings descended from the Anunnaki, bearing within their bloodlines a fragment of godly essence. Such narratives were not concealed in whispers. They were inscribed upon monuments, composed in sacred hymns, honored through ceremonies. Ruling meant more than governing. It meant embodying heaven's purpose. Subsequent dynasties throughout the ancient world maintained this identical assertion. Egyptian rulers identified themselves as offspring of deities. Within Sumer, kings positioned themselves as intermediaries between humankind and the divine realm. Across every empire, the declaration remained consistent. Rulers stood apart from ordinary folk, distinguished by celestial connection. Should the Vatican acknowledge such bloodlines existed, it would signify humanity's earliest leaders were not exclusively human. It would mean they belonged to something far more ancient and far more enigmatic. Tales of divine lineages did not stay confined to Mesopotamia. Throughout Europe, royal houses preserved myths claiming descent from gods, titans, or celestial messengers. Medieval historical records spoke of monarchs tracing their ancestry to Noah, or even to more enigmatic entities predating the Great Deluge. Within certain traditions, rulers adorned crowns fashioned like horns or wings, reverberations of symbols once connected to the Anunnaki. These were not mere ornamental choices. They represented marks of authority, declarations that kings claimed to traverse the boundary between heaven and earth. The Vatican, nevertheless, labored to manage these narratives. Through advancing the concept that authority flowed from God exclusively, it suppressed older myths of rulers claiming mixed heritage. Admitting otherwise would permit the notion that divine bloodlines still traversed the earth. And were that accurate, then perhaps kings and religious leaders were selected not only by heaven, but by remembrance of the Anunnaki. This shadow cast over royal ancestry was perilous. It suggested power itself might serve as evidence of an ancient bond. Certain researchers hold that the myth of divine right conceals a much older remembrance. From this perspective, kingship was not created, it was bestowed. Ancient Sumerian records mention rulers who governed for hundreds of years, spanning far longer than any human existence. These extraordinary reigns suggest something beyond ordinary mortals. To the ancients, these kings were not simply blessed, they were fundamentally different in nature. The shadow of the Anunnaki rested behind their crowns. When these accounts reached later eras, they were softened, extended lifespans transformed into symbols, divine descent became metaphor. Still, the essence endured. Rulers were chosen because of something transcending human capability. If these assertions held truth, then royal bloodlines might have represented humanity's final connection to the Anunnaki. And here is where silence proved most valuable. Acknowledging the truth would mean acknowledging that kings and priests carried reverberations of gods. The Vatican favored a simpler narrative, that only one god granted power and all others were fabrications. Narratives of divine bloodlines frequently merged with legend. In certain myths, kings were not only descendants of gods but also protectors of sacred understanding. Ancient inscriptions describe rulers receiving wisdom directly from heavenly entities, gifts of writing, legal systems, and celestial study. These rulers were celebrated as the chosen, intermediaries positioned between mankind and the Anunnaki. Their power was not solely physical but intellectual. To rule meant carrying fragments of divine wisdom within the mind as well as within the blood. As these traditions expanded, echoes emerged in distant territories. In Greece, kings claimed ancestry from Zeus. In Rome, emperors were declared sons of gods. Even medieval monarchs repeated this pattern, tracing their lines to biblical figures or mythical forebears. Yet beneath all these stories conceals the same foundation, a claim of being more than human. If such bloodlines carried divine essence, then authority was not solely political, but cosmic. And for the Vatican to acknowledge this would diminish its claim to be the singular bridge between heaven and earth. The myth of sacred bloodlines extended beyond rulers. It embodied a vision of humanity, touched by something beyond itself. Kings were remembered as intermediaries, half human and half divine, standing at the border between earth and heaven. Their power was not explained through politics alone, but through an ancestry that pointed toward the stars. Yet bloodlines are only one layer of this remembrance. The echoes of the Anunnaki did not remain within families. They spread into symbols carved in stone, concealed in cathedrals, whispered in rituals. To understand why the Vatican feared these memories, we must now step within the walls of sacred buildings and search for the hidden marks left behind. Throughout Europe's cathedrals, sacred artwork covers every wall and ceiling, yet not every image tells the story we anticipate. Among saints and angels, hidden shapes emerge. Serpents coil in peculiar corners. Winged beings extend their arms, and giants with unfamiliar faces gaze down from stone. To the worshippers, these details might have appeared as decoration. To scholars, they are echoes of something older. These forms resemble not only Christian symbols, but Mesopotamian remembrance. Carvings of dragons, winged protectors, and creatures with hybrid forms appear repeatedly. Some resemble the Apkallu of Sumer, half fish, half man, teachers of ancient wisdom. Others recall the giants who traversed between heaven and earth. Why were these forms carved into Christian temples? Were they warnings? Were they attempts to blend ancient remembrance into new faith? Or were they quiet acknowledgments hidden in stone that the Anunnaki were remembered long after their names faded? Stained glass windows were designed to teach the faithful stories from the Bible, yet in some figures emerge that have no clear place in Scripture. Some windows depict beings holding peculiar tools or standing beside stars and suns. Others show serpents not as adversaries but as protectors of light. To the ordinary observer, these were simple designs. Yet to those who look closer, the details tell another story. A story connecting to Mesopotamian myths of knowledge, wisdom, and forbidden truth. The use of symbols was not accidental. Artists frequently worked under direction, guided by church leaders who determined what could be shown. Why then would images with no clear Christian meaning be included? Perhaps it was tradition, memories passed quietly from generation to generation. Or perhaps it was resistance, a way to preserve stories the Vatican wanted silenced. Each window shines not only with color, but with questions. Questions that whisper of Anunnaki, echoes hidden in light. In certain cathedrals, gargoyles stare down from rooftops. Officially, they were meant to frighten away evil spirits or drain rainwater, yet their shapes are peculiar. Some resemble giants, some like hybrid creatures, some with wings like the Apkallu of Sumer. They are guardians, yet also reminders of beings that do not fit inside Christian doctrine. Their silent presence transforms every cathedral into a museum of hidden myth. When pilgrims entered these holy places, they might not have noticed the details above, but artists and builders chose those forms carefully. It is possible these designs carried memories older than Christianity itself. The Vatican rarely explains why so many non-Christian forms appear in holy spaces. To speak of it would be to admit that ancient myths still lived in stone long after clay tablets were forgotten. The gargoyles whisper of guardians, teachers, and giants, and their gaze still watches us today. Hidden meanings are not only found in statues and glass, they are also woven into the very patterns of cathedrals. Floors shaped as labyrinths, ceilings filled with stars, doorways carved with suns and moons. To many visitors, these were beautiful designs, yet their arrangement frequently followed ancient traditions. Some labyrinths resemble Mesopotamian patterns of the underworld. Some ceilings recall the star maps carved by Sumerian priests. These designs were not random, they were echoes of remembrance turned into architecture. Even the numbers used in cathedral design carry peculiar meaning. Columns arranged in groups, steps built in sacred counts, windows divided in symbolic numbers. In Christian teaching, these numbers represent holiness. Yet in older Mesopotamian culture, they also held power linked to gods, planets, and cycles of time. To see them in cathedrals suggests the builders remembered more than one tradition. And if this is accurate, then the Vatican stands in buildings that hide the very echoes it tried to erase. The walls, windows, and stones of cathedrals tell two stories. One is clear, the story of Christian faith. The other is hidden, the story of symbols older than the Bible. Serpents, winged beings, giants, labyrinths, stars, all placed inside spaces meant for worship. Were these accidents of art or deliberate whispers from builders who carried ancient remembrance? The Vatican rarely answers. Silence is easier than explanation. Yet for those who look closely, the clues remain. These cathedrals do not only point upward to heaven, they also point backward to Mesopotamia. And so, as we leave the stone walls behind, we follow the echoes of towers. Towers that once reached for the sky, where language was broken and power was scattered. The Tower of Babel and its shadow of the Anunnaki. The Tower of Babel is one of the most famous stories in the Bible. It tells of a time when humanity spoke one language and built a tower reaching the heavens. Yet when the Lord saw their ambition, he scattered them, confusing their tongues. To many, it is a lesson in humility. Yet in Mesopotamia, similar stories existed long before Genesis. Stories that speak of towers, gods, and the breaking of unity. The Sumerians told of ziggurats, massive stepped temples that rose high into the sky. These were not only places of worship, but bridges between earth and heaven. Priests climbed them to reach the gods, and rituals were performed at their peaks. Could the Tower of Babel be a remembrance of such structures? A retelling of humanity's attempt to touch the divine, reshaped into a tale of punishment? If so, then its roots are far older than the Bible. Archaeologists have uncovered ruins of great ziggurats in cities like Ur and Babylon. These stepped pyramids stretched toward the heavens, visible for miles across the flat plains. They were symbols of power, showing that kings could command earth and touch the sky. In Babylon, one temple was even called the foundation of heaven and earth. Its name alone reminds us of the ambition to bridge mortal and divine. The Tower of Babel may not have been one tower, but many, echoes of ziggurats that dotted Mesopotamia. Over time, their remembrance became woven into Hebrew tradition, reshaped into a cautionary tale. Instead of symbols of divine meaning, they became warnings against pride. The story was not invented. It was reimagined. And in its shadow, we hear not just the voice of God, but the distant echo of the Anunnaki. Language itself becomes part of the mystery. In Genesis, God scatters the people by giving them many tongues. Yet Mesopotamian myths speak of times when humanity once shared one speech, taught by the gods themselves. The Apkallu, wise beings of Sumer, were said to have brought writing and language to mankind. Could the confusion of tongues in Babel be a reversal of this gift? A deliberate breaking of what was once unity? If so, then the Tower of Babel was not only about pride, but about remembrance. It carried echoes of a time when humans and gods walked closer. When language was a bridge and not a barrier, the scattering of tongues was not just a punishment. It was a way to separate mankind from knowledge too dangerous to keep. And in this silence, the Vatican found comfort. For if Babel was more than myth, then it pointed directly back to the Anunnaki. The destruction of Babel is usually told as a punishment, but some scholars wonder if it was also an act of protection. In Mesopotamian myths, when mankind reached too high, the gods often struck them down, fearing that humans might steal divine secrets, fire, flood, or confusion. These were ways to limit human ambition. The story of Babel fits perfectly into this older pattern. It was not only about pride, it was about knowledge that humanity was not meant to keep. Imagine the tower not as a simple building, but as a symbol of unity. One people, one voice, one goal. In that unity lay strength, perhaps too much strength for the gods to allow. By scattering languages, they broke mankind's ability to build together. This left humanity divided, dependent, and unable to rise again. The Vatican rarely admits how closely this mirrors older tales. For if Babel was truly about forbidden knowledge, then it connects directly to the Anunnaki and their fear of human power. The Tower of Babel may have been more than a tale of arrogance. It may have been a story of separation, of humanity cut off from unity and knowledge. If you are enjoying this journey through hidden echoes, I invite you to like this video. Each gesture helps us continue to explore the shadows of the past together, searching for the truths left unspoken. Yet Babel was not the end of forbidden knowledge. The ruins of towers led to new questions. What knowledge was lost when humanity was scattered? What secrets did the Anunnaki once share, only to be silenced by fear? To answer, we must step into the next mystery. The hidden sciences, the fallen knowledge, and the wisdom that the Vatican worked so hard to conceal. Knowledge has always been seen as both a gift and a danger. In Mesopotamian stories, the Apkallu were wise beings who came down from the heavens to teach mankind. They gave the secrets of writing, farming, and building. Yet later, these same figures were remembered as dangerous, their wisdom too powerful, their lessons too bold. What began as a blessing became a warning. Humanity was told that not all knowledge was safe to keep. The Bible echoes this change. The serpent in Eden offered knowledge, but it led to exile. The watchers in Enoch taught forbidden arts, and their children became giants. Again and again, wisdom is remembered as both light and shadow. The Vatican has long repeated this warning, that forbidden knowledge leads away from God. Yet the deeper question remains. Who decided which truths were forbidden and why? If the Anunnaki once gave knowledge freely, then to silence it is to silence part of humanity's own remembrance. Among the secrets said to be given were the stars. Mesopotamian priests charted the heavens with incredible precision. They recorded eclipses, mapped planets, and measured time with accuracy that astonishes scholars today. Some believed This wisdom came not from men but from divine teachers. To look at the stars was to read the handwriting of the gods. Yet later traditions often labeled such practices as dangerous, even demonic. Astrology was banned, yet astronomy was allowed. A careful line drawn between faith and science. The Vatican inherited this struggle. For centuries, it allowed certain kinds of study, while forbidding others. Knowledge of the stars, metals, and healing herbs was often silenced, hidden away as superstition or heresy. Yet much of this knowledge had deep roots in Mesopotamia. Was it truly forbidden, or simply inconvenient to the story of one god as the only source of truth? The night sky still holds the same patterns. Perhaps they are not only stars, but messages the Anunnaki once shared. The fallen knowledge also included the secrets of metal and craft. In the Book of Enoch, the Watchers are accused of teaching humans how to forge weapons and ornaments, how to shape the earth itself. To the church, these skills were linked to sin, signs of corruption brought by fallen beings. Yet in Mesopotamia, the same skills were celebrated. The art of bronze, gold, and iron was not evil. It was progress, the foundation of kingship and civilization. This contrast shows how knowledge can be shaped into different meanings. To some, it was sacred, a gift of survival and power. To others, it was forbidden, a dangerous step too close to divine fire. The Vatican's silence hides this tension, because to admit the truth would be to admit that human progress began with lessons from beings remembered as Anunnaki, and so tools became both symbols of creation and curses of rebellion, depending on who told the story. Another form of forbidden knowledge was healing. In Mesopotamian texts, the gods were said to teach mankind about herbs, oils, and rituals that could cure illness. Priests and healers used plants to treat wounds and chants to ease pain. Yet as centuries passed, these practices became suspect. What was once seen as divine wisdom was later branded as sorcery. The same herbs that once saved lives were now feared as dangerous, their power hidden under suspicion of magic. In the Middle Ages, many healers were persecuted. Women who gathered herbs were often called witches. Knowledge that had flowed freely in Sumer was silenced under new rules. The Vatican shaped the boundary between holy medicine and forbidden craft. Yet ancient tablets remind us that healing was not a curse, it was a gift. By rewriting its meaning, faith changed how humanity saw its own survival. What was once divine guidance became secret practice, whispered in shadows. The story of fallen knowledge is not about wisdom lost forever, but about wisdom silenced, hidden, and renamed. From stars to metals, from healing to writing, humanity's oldest lessons were once celebrated as gifts. Later, they were rewritten as dangers, tools of rebellion or curses of sin. The Anunnaki became fallen angels, the Apkallu became watchers, and their teachings turned into warnings. Yet knowledge never truly disappears. It lingers in ruins, in symbols, in books hidden away. The Vatican may have feared these memories, but silence cannot erase them. To follow their trail, we must now move from forbidden lessons to the beings themselves. The giants, whose presence still haunts myths across the world. Across the ancient world, stories of giants appear again and again. In Sumer, beings of immense size were remembered as children of the gods and mortals. In Hebrew texts, they became the Nephilim, mighty figures who filled the earth with violence. In Greece, tales spoke of the Titans. In Norse remembrance, giants battled gods in endless struggle. Though cultures were far apart, their stories carried the same rhythm, the remembrance of beings too large to be forgotten. Archaeologists have even uncovered graves that some claim belong to these giants. Long bones, oversized weapons, and myths of massive rulers stir curiosity and fear. Mainstream scholars explain them as symbols, exaggerations, or errors of tradition. Yet the persistence of the stories suggests otherwise. Why would so many cultures remember beings of enormous size, unless they were recalling echoes of the same truth? Perhaps these giants were not fantasy, but remembrance of a time when the Anunnaki's children walked among men. Legends of giants were not only about their size, they were also remembered as keepers of strength and hidden wisdom. In Mesopotamia, mighty beings guarded temples and cities, their forms carved into stone gates. In Hebrew texts, some giants were remembered as rulers of vast lands, shaping history with their power. Even in Celtic and Nordic tales, giants were not always villains. Sometimes they were teachers, builders, or protectors, figures that blurred the line between monster and guide. The Vatican rarely spoke of these memories. Giants were explained away as metaphors for pride or sin, never as real beings. Yet the silence raises questions. Why would the idea of giants be so universal if it was only symbolic? Perhaps the giants were inconvenient reminders that humanity once shared the earth with beings far larger and stronger than themselves. Their presence pointed to the possibility that the Anunnaki's influence did not end with clay tablets, but with bloodlines walking in flesh. Some stories say the giants fell not only by war, but by flood. In Mesopotamian myths, the flood was sent to end the reign of noisy mankind, but it also destroyed the giants who roamed the land. In the Bible, the flood washed away the Nephilim, leaving only whispers of their remembrance. Other cultures also speak of disasters that ended the time of giants. Again and again, destruction followed their presence, as if the gods feared what they had created. If this pattern is true, then the fall of giants was part of a larger plan to reset humanity, to erase the children of divine and mortal. Yet traces of their remembrance survived. Stones too large to move, myths too strong to silence, graves too mysterious to explain. The giants may be gone, but their echoes remain in every culture that dares to remember. And in that silence, the Vatican's fear becomes clearer. For to admit giants is to admit the shadow of the Anunnaki. In many myths, giants were not only warriors, but also builders. Massive walls, towering stones, and megalithic sites were sometimes said to be the work of beings larger than men. In Mesopotamia, temples were linked to giant guardians. In Celtic stories, stone circles were built with the aid of colossal hands. Even in the Bible, the land of Canaan was said to be filled with giants whose cities reached the sky. These tales suggest that humanity once remembered the giants as architects of the impossible. Yet when archaeologists uncover such structures, official explanations rarely mention giants. Instead, they speak of clever engineering, lost tools, or communal labor. Yet the stones themselves remain a mystery, too heavy, too perfectly placed, too aligned with stars. Could it be that these works are the last traces of the giants' influence? The Vatican would never accept such an answer, for to do so would be to admit that humanity's oldest monuments might belong not only to man, but to beings of another kind. The giants fade from history, but their remembrance lingers in stone, in myth, and in silence. To call them legend is easy, but to see them as remembrance is harder. If they once walked among men, then the story of humanity is not only our own, it is a shared tale, half human and half divine, reaching back to the shadow of the Anunnaki. Yet whispers of giants were not the end of forbidden remembrance. Beyond their stories lie stranger echoes, still watchers in the heavens, maps of stars, and symbols of guidance carved into the sky itself. To see why the Vatican feared the Anunnaki, we must now lift our eyes upward and follow the watchers among the stars. In Mesopotamian tradition, the Apkallu, the watchers, were described as beings of great wisdom. They came from the heavens, clothed in wings and cloaks, shaped like fish, holding tablets of knowledge. Their role was to guide humanity, to teach writing, law, and the study of the stars. They were guardians between gods and men, shaping the path of civilization. These images were carved on temple walls, reminders of teachers too mysterious to forget. Later, Hebrew writings remembered similar beings as watchers, but their role was twisted. Instead of guardians, they became rebels who defied heaven. They were said to have descended, mingled with humans, and shared forbidden knowledge. Their gift of wisdom was rewritten as corruption. The same beings who once gave hope were turned into a warning. This change reveals how ancient remembrance was reshaped to fit a narrative of fear. What was once divine guidance became a story of sin. The Watchers were not only teachers of writing and law, they were also linked to the stars. Mesopotamian priests believed the heavens held messages written by the gods. Constellations were mapped, eclipses predicted, and planets tracked with care. This knowledge was practical, guiding agriculture and kingship. Yet, it was also sacred. To read the sky was to understand the will of the divine. Some believed the Watchers themselves were the ones who gave mankind this vision of the stars. Yet later traditions often silenced this idea. Astrology was branded superstition, while astronomy was allowed only under strict control. The line between holy study and forbidden science grew sharp. But why? Perhaps because to admit the stars were mapped long before Scripture would be to admit that divine wisdom was shared with mankind by beings not mentioned in sermons. And that truth would point directly back to the Anunnaki, whose presence was written not on scrolls but in the sky. The story of the Watchers also connects to giants. In Hebrew writings, when the Watchers descended, their children became the Nephilim, mighty beings who filled the land. In Mesopotamian tales, similar unions created heroes and rulers who shaped history with strength beyond human limits. These children were both admired and feared. They carried the power of two worlds, bridging the divine and the mortal. Their size and strength became the proof of ancestry that pointed to the stars. Yet, such stories were troubling to later faiths. If giants were real, then heaven and earth were not separate. They had mingled. To silence this idea, the Watchers were recast as fallen and their children as corrupt. The giants were destroyed by flood and fire, their remembrance erased. Yet traces remain, carved in stone and written in myth. The giants and their star-born fathers remind us of a time when the divine was not distant but present. And this closeness is what the Vatican feared most. The Watchers were also remembered as keepers of sacred law. In some Mesopotamian texts, they carried tablets of destiny, marking the fate of both gods and men. To hold these tablets was to hold the structure of the universe itself. In later Hebrew stories, echoes of this power appear in fragments, divine councils, heavenly records, and books of life. The Watchers were more than teachers. They were record-keepers of destiny. This role made them both revered and feared. To humanity, they offered guidance. Yet to the gods, they represented risk. For if mankind learned too much of destiny, then they could claim freedom beyond control. The Vatican rarely speaks of this idea, for it suggests that knowledge of the stars and fate was once shared openly before it was silenced. And if the Watchers wrote destinies in the sky, then perhaps the constellations are not only maps of stars, but reminders of what mankind was once meant to know. The Watchers, the stars, and the giants all point to a forgotten truth, that humanity was once closer to the heavens than we are told. Their remembrance is not just myth, but a whisper that refuses to fade. If you are enjoying this quiet journey through hidden echoes, I invite you to leave a comment. Share your thoughts. Do you believe the Watchers were real guides, or only stories reshaped with time? Your voice helps keep these echoes alive. Yet our path does not end here. If the Watchers brought knowledge of the stars, then what else was given and then taken away? Were there tools, machines, or devices so advanced they appeared as magic? To understand the full depth of the Vatican's fear, we must now move from the heavens back to earth, to the forbidden machines of the ancients. Across ancient texts, whispers speak not only of wisdom, but of tools, strange devices that seem to work beyond the limits of human skill. In Mesopotamia, there were tales of shining objects that measured the heavens. In Egypt, stories told of machines that lifted stones with ease. In Greece, myths spoke of automatons, golden figures that moved by themselves. These accounts are separated by centuries, yet they share one theme: knowledge of technology far ahead of its time. Mainstream history calls these inventions symbolic or legendary. Yet what if they were memories of real devices now lost? If the Anunnaki taught mankind not only writing and farming but also the art of machines, then humanity's first steps into technology were guided from above. To admit this would mean that progress was not only human, it was shared. The Vatican, by silencing such stories, protected the belief that all wisdom came from God alone, not from beings remembered as the Anunnaki. Legends from India speak of flying machines called vimanas. Descriptions tell of vehicles powered by unknown energy, crossing skies and even leaving trails of fire. In Mesopotamian art, winged discs appear above kings and gods, symbols often dismissed as decoration. Yet the images look eerily similar to flying craft. Were these only metaphors or memories of real machines once seen by human eyes? For the Vatican, such questions are dangerous. If ancient machines existed, then Scripture is not the only record of divine power. The Church emphasized miracles of faith, not technology of gods. Yet across cultures, the remembrance of strange craft persists. From chariots of fire in the Bible to discs of light in Sumerian carvings, echoes remain. Perhaps humanity's first encounters with flight were not inventions of man, but gifts or warnings from the Anunnaki themselves. Another forbidden remembrance is the secret of energy. Ancient temples were often built with precision that seems unnecessary for simple worship. Stones aligned with solstices, chambers that echoed with perfect sound, walls that hummed when struck. Some believe these were not accidents, but signs of knowledge about resonance, sound, and light. In Egypt, in Mesopotamia, even in South America, structures exist that suggest the ancients tapped into forces we barely understand today. If the Anunnaki shared such secrets, then these temples may have been more than places of prayer. They may have been machines themselves, buildings that channeled energy, preserved knowledge, or connected mankind to the stars. The Vatican would never admit this possibility, for if temples were once machines, then religion was not only about worship, but about power. And that power would not belong only to heaven, but also to the remembrance of the Anunnaki. Another ancient secret may have been the use of sound and vibration. Legends from many lands tell of stones that moved when music was played, or walls that crumbled when trumpets were blown. In Mesopotamia, hymns were said to carry divine power, shaping not only hearts but the world itself. Some believe these were not only songs of worship, but methods of harnessing resonance, using sound as a force. If the Anunnaki shared such techniques, then early humans may have known how to shape stone and space with vibration. Temples aligned with sound, chambers tuned to frequencies, and walls that hummed like instruments could have been part of this hidden science. Mainstream scholars dismiss this as imagination, but the persistence of such tales suggests otherwise. If true, then music was not just art, but technology, a tool of creation. And the Vatican, fearing this possibility, kept the remembrance buried. The remembrance of forbidden machines reminds us that human progress may not have been entirely our own. From flying craft to temples of energy, from sound to hidden devices, the ancients spoke of tools that bent the laws of nature. To accept these tales would mean that humanity once shared knowledge with the Anunnaki, and this truth would change everything we believe about history. Yet machines were not the only secrets left in silence. Beyond temples and devices, whispers speak of documents, writings locked away, hidden deep in archives, untouched by centuries of light. If the Vatican truly feared the Anunnaki, then perhaps its greatest fear is not machines or myths, but the records still resting in the shadows. Deep beneath the Vatican lies one of the most secret collections in the world, the Vatican Apostolic Archive. For centuries, rumors have said that within its countless shelves are texts never shown to the public. Officially, it holds papal records, letters, and church documents. Yet many believe it also hides books that tell a far older story. A story of gods, giants, and knowledge too dangerous to reveal. The idea of hidden texts is not new. From the Dead Sea Scrolls to lost Gospels, pieces of history have often been silenced. Yet the Vatican Archive is different. It is vast, locked, and protected with strict rules. Only a handful of scholars are ever allowed inside, and even then, only for specific documents. This silence has fueled the belief that among its shelves may rest memories of the Anunnaki, records that could rewrite not only history, but faith itself. Some stories claim that the archive holds tablets and writings taken from ancient Mesopotamia. When explorers, priests, or conquerors found strange artifacts, they were quietly removed and stored far from public eyes. If true, then the Vatican has preserved not only Christian history, but fragments of Sumerian and Babylonian remembrance. In those fragments could be the voices of the Anunnaki, preserved in clay, waiting in silence. Why keep such texts hidden? Perhaps because they do not fit the story the Church tells. If humanity once walked with divine beings not named in Scripture, then the foundation of faith is shaken. The archive becomes not just a library, but a vault of contradictions. And the Vatican, by holding its silence, controls what mankind is allowed to remember. The true danger is not what was destroyed, but what may still remain unseen in the shadows. Legends also speak of forbidden gospels, books that describe angels, watchers, and mysteries left out of the Bible. Some of these texts are known, like the Book of Enoch, long excluded from Scripture. Others are rumored to exist only in fragments or whispers. If hidden in the Vatican, they may still tell of giants, floods, and divine beings who shared wisdom with mankind. These Gospels may not deny faith, but they expand it into realms too vast for control. To admit such texts exist would mean admitting that the Bible is not the only voice of the divine. That is why silence is chosen instead. Better to call them lost than to reveal what they hold. For if these Gospels spoke too clearly of the Anunnaki, then the Vatican's authority would be weakened, and so the forbidden Gospels remain in the dark, leaving only questions for those who dare to wonder what lies beyond official words. Among the rumors about the Vatican's hidden rooms are tales of maps, ancient charts that show the world as it was long before explorers sailed the seas. Some claim that these maps reveal lands that should not have been known, coastlines drawn with uncanny accuracy, even images of stars aligned in forgotten patterns. If such records exist, they may connect directly to Mesopotamian traditions, where priests mapped not only the earth but the heavens above. Why would the Vatican keep maps secret? Perhaps because they do not fit the story of discovery told in history books. To admit their existence would be to admit that advanced knowledge of geography and astronomy existed long before the Church's age of exploration. It would suggest that humanity inherited wisdom from older teachers remembered as the Anunnaki, and so the maps remain hidden, whispered about but never shown, preserved in silence behind locked doors. The archive remains the greatest riddle of them all, what lies hidden in its shelves. Tablets, gospels, maps, or secrets too strange to name may hold the key to mankind's forgotten past. If these memories were ever revealed, they could change history forever. If you wish to keep uncovering these shadows, I invite you to share this journey. Sharing helps others find the path, and together we can keep these echoes alive. Yet the story does not end in locked archives. Beyond hidden books and forbidden machines lies a greater question. What does this fear reveal about the Vatican itself? Was silence about the Anunnaki only about the past, or also about power in the present? To answer, we must now step into the closing reflections and face what this fear truly means. The journey through echoes of Anunnaki remembrance has shown us a pattern. Bloodlines of kings, symbols hidden in cathedrals, towers that reached for heaven, knowledge silenced, giants remembered, watchers in the stars, machines forgotten, and archives sealed. Each piece tells the same story, that humanity once walked closer to something greater, and that remembrance was carefully hidden. The Vatican's fear may not be of demons or shadows, but of the truth itself. When we look at these fragments together, we see a story that was too vast for one book, too strange for one faith. The echoes of Mesopotamia shaped myths, scriptures, and even stone walls, and while history calls them legends, their persistence reminds us of something deeper. Perhaps these are not just tales of gods and angels, but memories of encounters that changed humanity forever. Fear is often born not from darkness, but from remembrance. The Vatican feared the Anunnaki because their presence suggests humanity was not alone in its beginnings. If kings held divine blood, if giants walked the earth, if stars were maps of destiny, then the world was shaped by hands unseen. Admitting this would mean rewriting history, scripture, and even faith itself. Silence became the safer choice. Yet silence does not erase remembrance. The whispers remain in ruins, in myths, and in art. The shadows are still there, waiting to be noticed. The Vatican's fear shows us that sometimes the greatest secret is not an object or a book, but a question that refuses to fade. Who walked with us in the beginning? And why were they hidden from our story? As we close this second journey, remember that history is more than dates and battles. It is remembrance shaped and reshaped across ages. If you have followed this path and felt the pull of forgotten voices, I invite you to subscribe. By subscribing, you help us keep searching the shadows together, opening doors that silence once tried to keep shut. Each step we take is part of the same quest, to remember. The Vatican may have feared the Anunnaki, but for us, they are not figures of fear. They are reminders that the human story is larger than we were told. And by exploring these echoes, we reclaim the right to wonder, to listen, to dream of the past, as if it still speaks. The story does not end here. The Anunnaki may be remembered as gods, angels, or myths, but their echoes continue to shape imagination. The Vatican's silence could not erase them, just as centuries cannot silence the stars. Perhaps one day the archives will open, or the ruins will speak more clearly. Until then, we are left with questions, and with the courage to ask them. So let this be a soft ending, not of answers, but of wonder. Tonight, we close our eyes with the thought that humanity's past is deeper than we know, filled with shadows, symbols, and voices waiting in silence. And as we drift into rest, we carry the same mystery that haunted the Vatican, the quiet fear that our beginnings were not ours alone.